Welcome back to Short Bites, a Stephen King podcast. As promised at the end of last episode, I am joined once again with Chris. And Chris, can you give us a short introduction to yourself again, just in case anyone has
Definitely,
short
definitely,
memories?
absolutely. So, my name is Chris Kosarich. I'm an indie published horror author. I have several books out to date. My latest book, which came out in October, is called Mr. Jack Requiem. Yeah, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, wearing the Stephen King Rules shirt. And so Jason was so kind to invite me to his podcast because I'm a huge King fan, obviously, and I love talking about my favorite author.
I forgot to mention the last episode, but I'm wearing like a Clive Barker shirt right now with my Rawhead Rex.
Awesome. Nice. Yeah, I noticed the shirt before, but I couldn't tell what it was.
Yeah, a lot of people think
I'm
it's a
watching you
band
on my
shirt.
little phone screen, so
Yeah, yeah.
that's awesome, man.
A lot of people think it's a band shirt. They're like, "Who's Rawhead
It
Rex?" I'm
kind
like,
of
"It's a
does look
movie."
like black metal or something. Yeah. No, but that's awesome. I love Clive. I love Clive Barker mostly when he wrote horror.
Yeah, me too. There's some of his more fantasy works that I like as well, but his early stuff
Oh
is
yeah,
like it's killer. Like,
like
holy
Books of
cow.
Blood and yeah,
Yeah, Books of Blood and
yep.
all that. Now, regarding your own writing, you kind of bounce around a little bit in subgenres within the horror genre. So I was wondering if there's any subgenre in horror that you still want to write.
Um, you know, I love all facets of horror. I mean, I've kind of done the traditional horror, which I love. Um, I've done sci-fi horror with the book I mentioned during the last podcast, and the one that I'm currently working on. Um, I honestly, I kind of dipped my toes into a little bit of everything, but I've even done stuff that's a little bit more edgier or what you would be considered erotic horror. I love doing
Mm.
that. So I kind of have done that already, but I love, especially because that's sort of what I grew up with, which is the more traditional stuff. One of the things that I've started working on that's going to probably be a next year publication is going to be I'm working on my own sort of coming of age 80s horror.
Nice.
Um, just as a little sneak preview. So that, that's something that I dearly love because I grew up in the 80s. And so I always wanted to do kind of like that sort of throwback 80s kind of horror. So that's, I don't know if that's really a subgenre, but that's something that I've always wanted to do. I just hadn't done it at this point. So,
That's a good point. I think it is a subgenre now.
right.
It started off in the '80s with like Stephen King and Robert R. McCammon,
Yep.
Boy's Life, and that. But people have really embraced it lately. These stories actually they go into the '90s too.
Sure.
But like lately, they've been pumping out like a lot because
I guess
that
you would,
influence is showing.
oh yeah, I guess you would kind of call it nostalgia
Yeah,
too, in a
nostalgia
way,
horror. Yeah,
because, like obviously with shows like Stranger Things, right?
yeah.
What was so cool about that was you saw a lot of the current generation, the young kids now, kind of embrace that show. But it kind of gave them sort of like this is what it was like growing up in the 80s, minus the upside down and the sinister government,
Yeah.
stuff. Um, and
Well,
so,
we had the sinister government.
well, this
Yeah,
is
not
very
not
true.
not not the same, but
And let me just apologize for the current idiot administration of my country to your fine
oh,
people. It's
you know
just,
what? It's not your fault. It's some of your Americans' fault, but it's not yours.
yeah.
So-
Let's just hope we don't blow the world up. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. Let's hope.
getting back to made up horrors. But yeah, I think that being my age, and it's kind of fun to kind of go back to that time period because it's a nostalgia thing, and it was a different time, and we had MTV and we had video games, and there was no internet, no of the stuff that we currently enjoy now. But it's a simpler time, and I think it's just kind of fun to kind of reminisce and kind of go back to that. I think that's why people that are our age, right? We still love the movies from the 80s, and we still love the music, and because it makes us remember what it was like to be 16, 17, 18 again.
Hmm.
And that was the kind of story like King probably did when he wrote It, right? That was him writing about what it was like to be a young person in the 50s. Um, so for me, I that was one of my bucket list things. I want to write a story that's because some of my favorite stories, by some of my favorite authors are some of their coming of age stuff. So I always wanted to do something like that. So I haven't gotten back to it in a while because I'm working on the edits for this forthcoming book, but that's definitely something that I wanted to do.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned erotic horror,
Hmm.
and that made me think of your book Rebirth.
Yeah.
That's touted as erotic horror. Can you tell us what that's about?
Yeah. So Rebirth, I'll give you, and a few people know about this. And so Rebirth, I was actually supposed to be working on Island of Devils as far as the edits go. That was my next, okay, I need to get back to this because I had finished the Roseblood trilogy with
Hmm.
the final book, Bloodlust. And so my plan is that I need to turn my attention to Island of Devils, get it edited, get it out. Because my concern was that the Ravening came out and this at this time, and I don't want too many years to go before that comes out. But as it turns out, 3 books later. So Rebirth was partially inspired by a very well-known indie horror author who wrote a book called Womb. You may know this guy because he's from Canada also.
Hmm.
And I had read Womb, blew me away, and so I that was kind of not directly an inspiration, but I wanted to write something that was a little edgier, a little nastier than what I normally do, even though some of the Roseblood books have their moments. And so that's really partly where Rebirth came from. The second part was coming out of the pandemic, and I wanted to do something and I know some people complain they don't want to be reminded about COVID and everything that we went through, but I mean, it's what we went through, right?
Hmm.
And art's going to reflect that. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, but get over it.
Yeah.
And so I came up with this idea of this guy who is trying to rebuild his life after the pandemic ends. And it kind of turned his life upside down. So he's trying to start over and he needs money. And he hears about a study at this Men's Health Institute where he can take part in this study and it'll pay pretty well. And, he'll be away for a week to 10 days and he'll have enough money to maybe get his own place. That's sort of the setup, except a friend of his who happens to be a small newspaper editor says, well, I had one of my reporters looking into this place because he had some information that maybe this place isn't what it seems.
Hmm.
And then the reporter goes missing. So she asks him, while you're there, kind of see if you can find out anything. And so that's sort of the setup for the book. And when the main character gets there, his name is Ben. And he starts to poke around. He starts to discover things, and it goes from there. And the book is definitely has its moments where I kind of push the envelope a little bit, but it was a play on the idea of the feminine divine. That wasn't my intention initially when I started writing it. It's just where the story went, and it was kind of fun to kind of play in that world a little bit.
Do you,
This world is so male dominated. What if something happened? It was kind of slow process, but what if things kind of shifted? And it was kind of interesting to kind of play around with that idea a little bit.
do you find yourself doing that a lot? Like, you'll finish a piece and then you realize after, like, this has been heavily influenced by this other thing.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder too what people might think of some of my stuff because the Rosebud trilogy was about a female serial killer. I have Rebirth. I have a few other books that's like, no, I'm not fixated on this at all. It just happens to be the story that gets told.
Hmm. Do you think what would you say is your out of your work? What would you say is the most Stephen King influenced?
Wow, that's a great question. I mean, probably parts of it definitely would be Night of the Pumpkin God and even Mr. Jack, just because it's a small town. It's got that small town horror thing, which I know most of us that love horror. I mean, that's like the sweet spot. It's because
Hmm.
it's a small setting, right? It's sort of isolated. There's not a lot of outside influences where a lot of things can happen to a fairly concise group of people, which to me is perfect for a horror story. Not that you can't have horror in big cities, but I think for me anyway, that's like the sweet spot.
Awesome. Now, before we go into more Stephen King discussion, I wanted to talk about some of your covers, because some of your covers are kind of frightening, like like the cover for Rebirth, and also the Ravening.
Right.
What who does your do you have the same person do your covers,
Yeah.
or
So when I started off indie publishing, initially I put out two ebook shorts,
uh-huh.
and it was just sort of like, I know indie publishing was kind of coming onto its own. Like you could really get noticed doing this. It's not thought of as negatively as it was years and years ago. And then after that, it just, eventually I'd like to not do this myself and go more traditionally. And I will at some point.
Mhm.
But yeah, I've been using the same cover artist. She's really great. She has a web page that I think she's in the process of changing it around, but I've used the same cover artist for all of my books. She's also an author as well, but she does a really nice. I mean, we work well together.
Mhm.
Actually, the recent book, which I know I showed on the last episode, this was actually the first cover that I had commissioned. Usually, she does a lot of pre-mades,
Mhm.
and I've been lucky enough to find pre-mades from her that just fit the story. But this was one that I had her do for me, and I mean, it was perfect. So yeah, but she does a really awesome job.
What's her name?
I think I know her web page used to be atrtinks.com, but I think it's changed now, and I don't know what it's called now. But her name is Rebecca. She does an awesome job.
Awesome. I'm gonna see if I can look into that as an
Yeah,
indie
she
author
does,
myself.
and she does horror is just one of the things she does. Science fiction, fantasy. I know she's done more mainstream stuff. She's done, I think, some romance covers. I mean, she dips her toes in the different genres for sure. But yeah, and I've been very fortunate too, because she does not um, do anything else. But I managed to talk, because I suck at some of the tech stuff. I'm not going to lie.
Mhm.
So she does a lot of my interior formatting for me, and I pay her for it, of course. So I'm very, very fortunate. And I know there's other people that do that, but yeah, she
Mhm.
does all that stuff for me. So
Well, that's awesome. Is she very expensive? Just you don't have to give me any numbers, but
no, I think she's pretty reasonable. I mean, she's, like most people, this is a side gig, but it's also an income. So, but I think she's definitely pretty reasonable.
excellent. Yeah, I'm always looking for cover art. That's like a almost like another hobby of mine. I hunt out
You know,
cover
I
artists.
just I wish I could remember because she went from one website to another, and she moved her online store to a different site, and then she changed the name.
Mhm.
Um, but I know that when I was last on her site, which is still under construction, I think some of her pre-mades went from like 100 to 150 per cover. But you can buy different packages. So some it's just a straight cover, and then there's this trade paperback cover. Then there's the ebook cover, and then she offers packages where you can get promotional materials um, that come with it, and things like that. So, like stuff that you can post on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. So,
Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna look into that. If you could, maybe if you could give me a link on Messenger when
yeah,
we're done.
absolutely, Jason. I'll shoot you her. I'll pull up the page. I've got it linked in one of her emails, so I'll send that to you.
Awesome, thank you. Now, before we get into the Stephen King grill part two, I want to talk about especially, I want to talk about Stephen King's latest book, Never Flinch. I know you read it. What did you think about Never Flinch?
No, I enjoyed it. I read it. I actually had a week off from work, so to me, there's no better vacation when I'm
Yeah,
not at work.
absolutely.
I'm off for a week, right? Paid vacation, and I have a new Stephen King book to read. It's like it works. Every life is beautiful. But
Yeah.
yeah, I got through most of that on my week off, and I enjoyed it. You know, some of the promotional stuff that was coming out leading up to the book's release, and then even after, and there's even an afterword where he mentions that this book was a little bit of a struggle for him, which is
Hmm.
kind of funny, because here's this guy who's influenced a lot of us, right? He's our favorite author, but to read about, like, even at times he struggles, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that it was another Holly story, which we talked about before. Some Stephen King readers, which if you're a constant reader, come on, you love it. But
Yeah.
some of his some of his fans did not care for Holly. Don't care for Holly, and I get it. But we love her character. We love seeing what new crazy adventure she's going to be on, and hopefully King does never kills her off. Please don't do that. That's not nice.
That would be mean after
That
so
would,
many books,
if
right?
Holly says, it would be ooey.
Unless she ages and dies of old age or something.
Yeah, exactly. But no,
Because
never
she
flinch.
has been progressively aging.
Definitely. And I mean, let's be realistic. Heroes, we'd like to think they live forever. They don't. But I think if Holly does go, hopefully it will be in a heroic manner. You know.
Yeah.
But let's hope that's a ways off. But no, never flinch. I enjoyed it. Definitely I can see where, and I've seen some people post online it wasn't their favorite. They like Holly, but it wasn't their favorite because it was literally two different storylines coming together. So I can see where
Mhm.
King might have struggled a little bit during the writing of that, trying to get everything to come together. I also think it's clearly his most political book.
Mhm.
I think just from the cover alone, I mean, it's got you know the symbolism of the justice statue,
Blindfolded and
blindfolded. So I mean, and when it's a Holly book too, she's not going to hold back. Um, so I think that even though Joaquin doesn't really hide his politics at all, depending on the story, it always seems to creep through. And you know what? He's Stephen King. He's Stephen fucking King. He can do whatever the hell he wants to do, and he doesn't really care, nor should he.
yeah, exactly.
But I think there in a lot of ways this was his most political book, just because of the plots, the characters. I do want to say one thing about it because I read one review that I shouldn't have read before I started reading it, and the review was very well written, but there was a comment made about one of the characters in the book, and this was before I finished it.
Mhm.
And so when I finished it, I really kind of disagreed with the reviewer. And you probably know where I'm going to go with this. And it was the assumption that King was one of the characters, or one of the antagonists in the story was the guy named Christopher Stewart.
Mhm.
And there was the assumption that King was taking a character who was trans and not really making a statement, but making them a villain. And I didn't see that at all, just because of the nature. The character was not trans. The
They're not
character
trans,
was,
yeah.
they were a character who had been brainwashed by their church to do these evil deeds, but also somebody who was very close and lost his sister, his twin sister, at an early age. So that affected his psyche to
Mhm.
where he started wearing dresses because, in a way, to his psychology and way of thinking, he was keeping his dead sister alive.
Yeah.
So
It's more of a personality disorder than, but I
exactly,
guess I could see why people might find that controversial because he's comparing, a mental illness to
right,
transgender people, but or cross-dressing people, but I don't think that was the point at all. It's he suffered this serious trauma in his past, and
sure,
he's sort of acting on that, but he's not completely in charge of his faculties. When the other
absolutely,
personality takes over, that's bad things happen.
yeah. And I can definitely see where somebody might see that and go, well, and
Yeah.
hindsight being what it is. But I think as a writer, and I understand now, would I have gone there? Maybe not. The story, the old adage of, we let the story tell itself. And I think with the two converging plot lines, what made it critical for a character who's male but occasionally wears female clothes and dresses as a woman was for them to get close to some of the characters they were looking to kill
Yeah.
or kidnap, or do bad things to. So to have the character comfortable wearing a wig and a dress. It made sense. So that's what
Mhm.
I got from it, not that King was trying to make a person who was trans, which
Yeah.
clearly that character wasn't.
It
Um,
it yeah, it doesn't really go into, like, Silence of the Lambs territory where
exactly,
like,
exactly. So,
where
but
it's shown to be like what would you say? It's shown for shock value in a sense,
right,
that,
right.
"Oh,
So that
this guy's not only is he torturing women, but he's, like,
he wants to
pretending
be
to
a
be a
woman.
woman
Right,
himself."
and that was
Yeah.
completely different. Yeah, so this was, complete like you were saying, more of a psychological thing. Um, but yeah, so that when I read the review and then I started reading the book, I was a little concerned because I'm like, "King, what are you doing?" This is
Yeah, yeah, I felt that way
so
too.
then when I got to the near the end, I was like, "Okay." I felt better because I didn't wanna see that either.
Yeah,
Marginalized people don't need to continue to be marginalized, and I know King is a
yeah,
lot smarter than that, so
yeah, and also, I don't want to disparage anyone who finds, uh a contradiction in what we're saying. I don't wanna be an apologist for it if
right.
somebody was offended by it. I think it is what it is, and if somebody read it and says this is, like, anti-transgender, I wouldn't
No,
personally agree with it, but I'm not gonna argue. I'll be
right.
like, "Yes, that's legitimate."
Sure. I mean,
Be
everything is open to interpretation, right? But I think, if people know King well enough through his writing and through, you know, what's been written about in his interviews, I mean, he's not that way, you know?
Yeah. He's you know what? Because you come across like I watch a lot of videos on YouTube and TikTok, and there's a lot of people out there who think Stephen King is racist because his villains are often racist, and I don't get that
Uh,
because
that makes no sense.
that makes no sense to whatever he's using that in it like I the way I explain it, he's using that as part of his toolbox.
Exactly.
His characters are evil, vile people in the first place before we get to, uh and usually there's a reason for it. They're still human and
Right.
humanized. There's usually a reason why they're this way in the first place, but
Exactly.
they have to get to that place before they start doing the really horrendous things.
Exactly.
Yeah, and, I think, some people just don't read Stephen King, clearly enough, to, read a short or a story about you know, people who are racists doing terrible things, and then you think Stephen King's a racist?
Yeah, that
Because do you
makes
think he identifies with his own villains? Like
I don't understand that line of thinking, but, you know.
yeah. On a bit of a more chipper note, I don't know, what did you read the, novella or short story, The Life of Chuck?
I did. So that's in If It Bleeds, and I know that movie just came out. I have not seen the movie. I know you did because I saw your post about it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, Mike Flanagan did it, so it's going to be good. And he's adapted a lot of Stephen King's works, and he's a huge Stephen King fan. His adaptation of Doctor Sleep was brilliant. But I love the story. I mean, that's the thing too that a lot of um, maybe casual Stephen King readers, or even people that don't really read King but have seen
Mhm.
the movies, um, don't realize that he's done a lot of stuff that really isn't what you think. From Shawshank Redemption, pretty much everything in different seasons.
Mhm.
I mean, it has dark elements, but a lot of that stuff is not what you would traditionally call horror
Yeah.
in a traditional sense, like what we're talking about in Night Shift. But I mean, it was a beautiful story. Even his novella, Elevation, it was another very reminiscent of
Yeah.
that. Where King just really can spin a good story with a message and a simple message. But yeah, I look forward to seeing the movie because I like Mike Flanagan. But I've heard good things. I've heard it's
It's
really good.
excellent.
Yeah.
It's if you've read the novella,
Hmm.
then you've pretty much seen the movie.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, I've heard. Yeah,
almost identical.
which is great. Which
Yeah,
is great.
and I absolutely loved it. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts, when you do see it.
Yeah, definitely. I absolutely will because I like Hiddleston. So yeah, and like I said, I'm a huge fan of Mike Flanagan, so I'll pretty much watch anything he does.
What did you think of Elevation? Because I remember when that came out, Facebook all because we both follow a lot of horror
Yeah,
authors on
yeah.
Facebook, right? A lot of people were pissed at that one, and so I avoided it for the longest time, but I read it earlier this year. I think it was
It
one
was
of the first books I read this year, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it
It,
was a great, heartwarming story.
I need to revisit it because I read it obviously when it first came out.
Hmm.
But it was one of those, and I knew getting into what type of story it was going to be. But it's just one of those sort of whimsical kind of Stephen King stories, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes we find those too in his collections. And I will say, I don't love every single story he puts out. In fact, the last collection, probably my least favorite story was the one that was set, I think, in the UK about the mob, the Irish mob.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know he was, King has had a long love affair with crime stories. That one just didn't. I mean, I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. So,
Hmm.
um, and I wish I could remember that story's title, but for the life of me, I can't right now. But yeah. So I mean, even King, he doesn't always knock it all out of the ballpark. But Elevation was just one of those sort of quirky, kind of beautiful little stories.
Hmm. I like stories like that because I read and I write a lot of dark stuff,
Sure.
and it's nice to come across something that speaks a truth, but is also positive, even though it's got darkness in it. Like
Exactly.
in
And
these stories, people are still dying in these stories, right?
yeah.
And that's dark on its own. But Stephen King writes it in such a way that it's just beautiful, and it makes you think that it's not just about death; it's about the life that
Hmm.
came before the death and how we celebrate life or how
Exactly.
we should celebrate life. And I think
Exactly.
some people just kind of miss the point in that they want old Stephen King with the fangs
Right.
and the bitterness.
Well, that's what I said before too about the difference between the King that was writing these stories and Night Shift is he's still the same guy, obviously, right, but much older.
Mhm.
But his outlook, and it makes perfect sense. You're a different man when you're 30 as opposed to when you're when you're in your 70s,
Yeah.
late 70s. You still like stories with teeth, right? But sometimes you want to write something that says something else, because you've lived a long life. I mean, of course, your stories are going to be a little bit different sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense.
Absolutely. All right, so we are now moving into the Stephen King Grill Part 2. And since we're talking about favorites and least favorites, what would you say is your least favorite Stephen King novel or short story or whatever?
Wow. Short stories, I'll probably say, since we were just talking about it, that short story that I just referenced in his last collection, the
Mhm.
Irish mob story, the kidnapping, that I just didn't didn't do much for me. I mean,
I read that collection, and I don't even remember it, so
yeah, it just, I don't know. I know where, again, King likes his crime stories. It wasn't one of my favorites, for sure. Least favorite book. Um, wow. Um, all right, I'm gonna probably make a few people scratch their heads. I like it for what it is, but I think in some ways Carrie was a very risky first novel,
mhm.
just because of the format. Like, I know it put him on the map, but I think your first novel being kind of written and I love the story, don't get me wrong, but I think writing it that sort of epistolatory style is extremely talk about, I mean, think about the guts that you had to have to make your first novel that kind of format. And
Yeah.
that's pretty risky. And I don't know if that would necessarily fly today, especially when you have, people, their attention spans are so limited.
Mhm.
And like I said, I'm not suggesting that the book should have been rewritten. And it's not really my least favorite either. But I think for a first book, that's really pretty, um, like I said, it's pretty risky.
And
You know?
brave.
Yeah, I don't know if I have. I mean, I'd have to give it some more thought. I think maybe, kind of like in that in between period with King, maybe one of the post accident books. But I mean, probably, I really appreciated Lisi's story just because it was such a, you could tell it was an important book to him, but it kind of jumped around a little bit.
Mhm.
Like he was trying to say something, like the secret language of marriages, and sometimes the secrets that are hidden that you don't always know, or else they wouldn't be secrets, right? But I think, and I enjoyed the book. I didn't love it, and I think
Mhm.
that's one of the ones I want to revisit sometime. And another one that I've been thinking about rereading that I haven't read since it first came out was Rose Matter, which I enjoyed, but I virtually remember nothing about it.
Yeah. On the opposite end here, do you have a favorite, either or both short story by Stephen King and novel?
Well, my favorite novel is The Shining. I mentioned that before. I read that one usually once every 4 or 5 years. I'll
That's
pick up
right,
the
yeah.
Shining. Got a couple different editions of it. Favorite short story. It's definitely going to be in this collection, and I would have to say just because it's such an interesting, and it's the story that leads off Night Shift. It would probably be. I mean, I love his grittier, sort of right to the point stories like Gray Matter, the one we're going to read. They're just so much fun to read. But Jerusalem's Lot is so rich
Mhm.
because Salem's Lot is like, for those readers who are new to Stephen King, one of the first things I recommend. I'm thinking about reading Stephen King. What would you recommend? I hear that at work sometimes. It's usually Salem's Lot, Pet Cemetery. The golden age of King. I'll usually hand, because handing somebody a brick like it or The Stand can sometimes turn scare away new readers.
For sure.
Usually for somebody who's wanting to get into Stephen King, usually the Salem's Lot. So to read a story that's sort of a prequel to Salem's Lot, if you will, I just found extremely interesting, and it just gave it so much more depth. To have this sort of prehistory of the town. Um,
Yeah,
so that one has always stayed with me. It's one of my favorites for sure.
nice. Oh, um, you mentioned, like, if you were to give a recommendation for somebody new to Stephen King, what if they're not a horror fan? They're kinda skittish about horror. What would you recommend? But they still wanted to read some Stephen King. What would of his non-horror books would you recommend?
Probably. Well, I mean, he's written a few. I mean, the thing about King is, even though his more crime oriented books are still have elements of horror. So, I guess you could maybe suggest like one of them, like Mr. Mercedes would be a good place to start, even though that has some really dark elements to it. I mean, obviously the Dark Tower series, but a lot of those are intertwined with his other novels. So
Yeah,
The Eyes of the Dragon is a dark fantasy, but again, it's connected to a lot of his other books. I mean, some of the books we talked about before. I mean, although I wouldn't really recommend like Elevation to somebody who's new to King, because that's not really indicative of what he normally does.
yeah,
Um, maybe some of the hard case crime line books like Joyland, those were great.
I
Um,
love that book.
and the one that came out after that was really good. What was that called? There
Oh,
was
Later?
Yeah, Later, to me that felt like old school Stephen King.
Yeah, I love that too. That was really good.
Yeah, and again, like that reminded me. I Other than the character of the detective, the female detective, I couldn't really figure out why that was published by them, because even though Joyland too had more supernatural or sort of horror elements to it, but yeah, both of those were really good books. But yeah, for somebody who's new, to me that starting off with Salem's Lot, because it's such an iconic book. It's King rewriting Dracula.
Mhm.
And it's got all those classic elements, but it's just it's the small town, it's the um, those kinds of things. So to me, I think it's always a good starting place for new readers. If you're going to start with Stephen King, unless you're like me and start with his darkest book ever, which is Pet Cemetery, but it's always a
Oh,
good place to start.
yeah. You mentioned, The Dark Tower. Have you read The Dark Tower, and are you a tower junkie?
Yes, I've read the entire series, including the book that he released some years back called A Wind Through the Keyhole. I am, I know King fans are either they love the Dark Tower series, or they'll read it because it's Stephen King. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle.
Mhm.
I will tell you, I fall into that category of, out of the entire series, the final three books are my favorite. So that's Wolves
Yeah,
of
you know
the
what?
Song of Susanna, and The Dark Tower. Now, it's not that I don't like the first four.
Yeah.
I do, and I know some people love books 2 and 3. That's like their favorites. I think with King, the reason why there was a big pause in that series was because I think he had to figure the rest of the story out.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can tell reading the first book, okay, it does kind of read like he started this story in college, which was totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a brilliant. That first line is iconic, right? You know,
The gunslinger
the man in black fled across the desert, and a
and
gunslinger.
the gunslinger followed.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's such a that pulls you right in.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think the direction that it went, um, obviously characters from Salem's Lot appear in
Yeah.
Wolves of Atala. It just, to me, it sort of brought the whole thing, ironically and symbolically, right, full circle. And I just
Mm-hmm.
appreciated those final 3 books. And I know putting himself in the final book turned some readers off, or some readers kind of rolled their eyes. To me, it made sense.
I loved it.
I did too, and I
That
love
was
the
that was what made it for me.
right.
That and the very ending.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil the series because
Right.
that's pretty monumental. But that ending, like the very last chapter,
Oh yeah,
we'll just say that is awesome to me. That like
it
blew
is.
my mind.
Well, if you think about all of the symbology that is in the Dark Tower books, and in a lot of his other books too, it made perfect sense.
Hmm.
Um, but not everybody likes the same things. Like, people that are fans of the show Lost hated the final episode. I did not. But hey, we all can't agree on everything. So
Absolutely. But I find that interesting because a lot of people, like you said, they love those first four books, but they're kind of
right,
either about the last ones or they don't like them at all.
right,
But I like those three last books the most. And it's because
yeah,
like I love those first four books. I think book number 3, The Wastelands, is probably amongst my favorite.
uh-huh.
But those last 3 books, man, they sent me to another level. It
And
was
he was pulling everything together.
yeah.
Everything. The whole book is about a journey, right, and to the Dark Tower, literally. But you could see him kind of pulling everything together, and he was bringing other elements in, like Father Callahan, and we even saw the entity that might be an evil clown,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. So he was pulling it. He was like not holding back, and
Yeah.
so bringing everything together. So to me, I liked more how it ended than how it began. Not that it didn't suck me in from the beginning, but yeah, for sure. We're in total agreement.
Yeah. Which is cool because, like I said, you don't really meet too many King fans who
And,
feel this way. So I
that's
got
why
excited when you said that.
that's why I prefaced what I was going to say, because I know how people feel, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah. All right, so we meandered a lot, and there's
Yeah,
one
I know. We did that on the last episode, but oh well.
well, there's a reason for that, and
What's
it's
that?
because, well, especially this one. This short story is very short, and there's not much to it. So we'll move into it now. And of course, we're talking about the short story Battleground. And as usual, this is we're going into spoiler territory with this story. There's not much to spoil though. It's pretty straightforward.
Uh-huh.
Except for maybe how it ends. The ending is kind of surprised me. I always, even on my reread, because I reread it twice for this episode, and even the second time when I was rereading it for I just read it last night again. I expected it to end differently than it did, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I had a basic, um, when I went into this story a month ago. I had a basic. I remembered basically what the plot was,
Yeah.
but that ending, it just comes out of nowhere, and you're just like, holy.
So,
Again, in a way, it makes no sense, sort of. But again, it's the beauty of the short horror story. It doesn't
yeah.
have to, you know.
Yeah. Now this one is absurd. It's kind of crazy, and I like how absurdist it is. I kind of like that literary sort of, I don't know what you call it. It's like a tool or maybe even a subgenre all its own. But Battleground was first published, as a lot of these were, in Cavalier magazine in September of 1972, and of course it was collected in Night Shift. and it was adapted in TNT's Nightmares and Dreamscapes TV series. The TV version has absolutely no dialogue whatsoever in it. And you can see why if you've read the short story.
Oh yeah.
The
And I
story, sorry, go ahead.
no, you finish.
I was just going to say the story itself is about a hitman who just gets home from a job. Uh, he only does 2 or 3 hits a year. And when he gets to his apartment, there's a package waiting for him. So he takes it upstairs. He thinks it's a bomb, and he's not too far off the mark because
Hmm.
he takes a lot of precautions opening it. And
Hmm.
when he opens it, it falls to the floor, and it's a toy box. It's a GI Joe Vietnam. Oh, what's it called? The Vietnam. I forget, but it's basically those little green
Like an
men.
infantry set from yeah.
Yeah, the infantry set. So, and they start crawling out and they attack him, and he pretty much has to survive in his little apartment while he has these little green soldiers coming at him with tanks. There's a couple. Was there a tank? There's some rocket launchers anyway, and
What's
helicopters,
up? Yeah.
and the foot infantry. They go after him. This-
So what I
uh,
loved about this story is, and again, I think if you're much younger than you and I are,
mhm.
when I was a kid, I had these. I
Yeah,
had
me too.
these little plastic green soldiers,
Yeah,
and so if you're somebody who's 20 something right now, 30 something, you probably never had those when you were a kid. Certainly if you're 20 years old.
yeah.
So I
Although
when
they do still sell them. My son actually had
oh, did
some
you
of them.
really?
Yeah, but, they were different. They were bigger, I think, a little bit bigger. They
Yeah,
weren't the
yeah,
same,
'cause
but
they're
yeah.
probably afraid of a kid putting them in its mouth and choking on it.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, I had those when I was a kid. So when I remember how much I really envisioned this story, reading it for the first time, because I could see this happening, very clearly. Um, so yeah, that was the great thing about reading the story being my age is because I remember playing with those when I was a kid. So I
Mhm.
think, you know, I don't know if somebody who's much younger would have that same sort of feel. And I interrupted you before, and I'm sorry about that. What I was going to say, I think I remember seeing that Dreamscapes, Nightmares and Dreamscapes episode. Although I vaguely remember seeing the uh, when they were showing this story, which ironically wasn't in the book with the same title. But I don't remember much else about it. But I'm pretty sure I'd seen it. But I'd like to go rewatch it sometime just to see how accurate it was to the original story.
Yeah. Yeah, I meant to rewatch it, before we recorded here, but it just didn't happen.
Right.
You can find it for free on, YouTube, and
Oh, no kidding.
I think you can rent it on other
Right.
various platforms, but, like I said, it just didn't get to it. But, yeah, from my memory, it's pretty, I remember there being difference, like, I remember Renshaw, the main character, I think he was tied down to the floor at one point,
Oh, really?
and but he's not in the, short story version anyway. But, yeah, I'm not too sure if that's an accurate memory. Um, I was wondering what you thought about its absurdist sort of, feel to it, and, uh, did the craziness affect you at all?
I just remember this is good. It's definitely an absurd story. I mean, come on. It's basically about a hitman. Am I allowed to talk about the plot? Or are we going to dive into
Yeah.
different
No,
aspects of it? Basically, about
you
a
can talk
hitman
about.
who gets this package in the mail and opens it, and all these army men and tanks and helicopters come out of the box and attack him. And he's fighting for his life in his apartment. Obviously that's absurd. But
Yeah.
the reason why it's happening is because a rival who he was commissioned to kill was basically getting revenge.
Yeah.
It's a
It was
completely
his mom too, like,
yeah,
the
like
person he killed, it was their mother.
yeah. So it's a totally absurd story. But what's just so much fun about this is obviously this story was written a long time ago, and so you have to keep that in mind. And again, it goes back to what I said before on when we did the last episode. King was writing a lot of these stories and sending them out to these men's magazines that publish these little horror stories,
Hmm.
simply because he needed to make money. So the stories had to be very short, especially in Battleground's case. It's like Jason, you were saying, it's a very short story. It does not waste any time getting to the action.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I love Night Shift so much, is because it doesn't. There's very little fat in these stories. They get right to the point, which makes those stories that much fun, more fun. Um, so King was, when he was creating these stories, um, you know, a lot of this was to make money. So he, could send these stories out to these magazines and get a check so he keep the lights on. So that's the beauty of these stories, is that there's not a lot of fat. They don't waste time. They get right to the point. And certainly in this case, it doesn't. It doesn't waste any time, and that's what made the story, even though as absurd as it is, the idea of a toy box full of army soldiers attacking you.
Hmm.
Um, there's no explanation. It wasn't a meteor flying by. It wasn't radiation, or, I mean, it's absurd, but it doesn't matter. You're sucked into the story as you're watching this, pretty, vile human being, right? He gets paid to kill people. He's not a good person. Fight for his life,
And
and
now,
it's a lot of fun. And it's
yeah,
from, he gets his gun. He barricades himself in I think it's a bathroom. I think at one point.
he's in his bedroom, and then he tries to get into the living room, but he's pushed back into the bathroom.
Yeah, yeah. And so, he's literally fighting for his life against toy army men that can inflict pain and damage and possibly even kill him. So,
Especially those rocket launchers. It
those
takes out like a big
buckets.
chunk of the door.
So yeah, so it's totally absurd plot, but once you get into it, you just keep flipping the pages because you want to know
Yeah.
what's going to happen next, and what's going to happen next to John Renshaw as he's trying to survive this onslaught by toy army men.
Yeah.
Uh,
One of my favorite aspects of this short story is how he reacts to it. There's no question in this. He doesn't question it. He's just like, all right, it's on. We're fighting.
right, exactly. Well,
He's not like, oh my God, these little green toys are attacking me. He's like, let's do it. He's down for it.
it's I think the first instance where he realizes they're not toys, and at that point, it's not, how can this be? So, well, my God, they just shot at me, or the guy with the bayonet just stabbed my ankle. Obviously they can inflict pain. So yeah, as absurd as it is, it's just a lot of fun.
The biggest thing that he was surprised about is I think it was one of the helicopters driving by. There's like that big BAR gun, the bar gun that's
Yeah,
they're shooting out the side door. They're aiming for his eyes,
right,
and he's like, they're aiming for my eyes. Like they
yeah,
really truly mean to kill me.
right, exactly. Yeah, the shit's for real,
Yeah,
and and then it really goes off. Um, what actually does an interesting shift at the very end,
yeah,
because you think there's just going to be this final standoff, and then it kind of ends.
yeah.
Um,
I kept thinking he was going to win, and I don't know why. I think it's because they're little green men. You think he'd be able to
right,
just wipe them out, but they pretty much blow up the entire apartment.
right. Which I didn't want to give away the end. I wanted to wait till we got there.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, I didn't want to steal the show, but yeah, the ending. What did you? I'm going to turn the tables, Jason. And ask you, what did you think about the ending?
Well, like I said, even when I reread it twice for this episode, and both times I expected him, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know why, because I knew how it ended, but I expected him to kind of be the victor. But he's not. They pretty much do a kamikaze and
That's
take out the entire apartment.
where
And
the
I love that at the ending when there's that a couple uh, on the ground floor, and his shirt comes floating down to them, and
uh,
it's like all riddled with holes and stuff, so you know it's him or his shirt. So he's completely gone, right? Uh,
well, the
yeah,
scene of two right before his demise is he sees, I think, where it's his thermonuclear weapon,
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
and I'm like, holy, really? Like, I never had a toy atom bomb, but that again, going back to the whole bizarro almost absurdity of it. But yeah, that final ending, where the people on the ground see that explosion and the shirt
yeah,
falling down, and it was just like, wow, it was just like touche. I mean, it was
yeah.
it was just, again, it made no sense, other than a revenge aspect of it, which is absurd in and of itself. But it was just a lot of fun to read.
Do you think that the absurdity is any way related to, because King was like a young father at this time, so his kids were probably playing with these toys.
Hmm.
Do you think there's any connection between him using this as an absurdity to what those toys actually represent and having kids play with them?
Good question. I mean, obviously, we know King protested Vietnam,
Hmm.
so obviously, he doesn't hide his politics. But knowing that he was involved in that when he was in college, yeah, it's a really interesting idea that I never really thought about before. But I'm sure probably when his kids were little, they played with army men, and I'm sure that's got to be. I mean, look, we get our ideas from the weirdest places, right, Jason?
Yeah.
It'll pop into your head when you're in the shower, right, or driving to work, or cooking dinner, whatever. In fact, I just one of the short stories I'm working on right now. Um, I was helping a friend of mine who moved back down to Florida, and he was going to staying with his mom for a while. Um, and I was helping him unload a storage pod into a storage unit. This was a couple weeks ago,
Hmm.
and of course I'm in Florida, so it's even now, even a couple weeks ago it was hot as hell. And we started in the morning. I mean, we an hour and we were soaked with sweat, but we were
Yeah.
helping him unload this pod and put it into a storage unit. And so I got an idea. Like, what if something was inside a storage unit, started making these weird noises? Two guys were unloading, putting things in a nearby storage unit, and they like, what's inside, you know? So that got my juices flowing, so to speak. And so I've been working on this story about just that.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, the ideas come from
Everywhere.
everywhere, constantly. Um,
I love it when like two or three different ideas that you're sort of mulling over unconsciously and consciously sort of come together in one story,
oh yeah,
and then you realize it and you're like, oh my god, that's
yeah,
that's awesome, like,
oh yeah.
yeah.
So I'm sure King probably his two sons when they were little had those, and I'm sure that's he probably they were probably scattered all over the floor, right, like kids do, right? And he's probably picking them up and
Or stepped on them.
stepped on one at first, and then is gathering up the little green army men, right? He, knowing King, at that age of being a young father, he probably had this idea. Well, what if these soldiers turned on me?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's it's fun to speculate, right? But I'm sure
Yeah.
that's where the idea came from.
I like the idea though, like it's kind of absurd that we get kids to play with army men,
Yeah,
because like what exactly are we doing here? Are we feeding the violent side of our human nature, or
right,
are we training them for some future endeavor? you know?
right, exactly. Yeah, and I guess they could say the same thing about all the video games, but
Yeah. But it is what it is, right? I mean, it's all in fun too. Like I played with those and I love them. And I when I
yeah,
play video games, they're usually pretty violent video games. But every once in a while, you just sit back and you're like, "What am I doing?" Like,
yeah, that's true. Very, very true.
yeah. All right. So, what are your overall thoughts on Battleground here?
I mean, it's just a short, like you were saying, it's one of the shorter stories in the collection. I mean, it's just a fun read. As absurd as it is, King is once again showing us, even back then, that he's an absolute master at his craft and at the top of his game. With a story that just sucks you in, as absurd and crazy as it is, and just pulls you right through to that ending. It's a
Yeah,
blast.
I like it too. I think it's honestly, it might be one of my favorites because it's absurd and it's kind of crazy, uh, and it's short and it's just fun.
Yeah, mine
You
too.
don't really have to think too much. It's just about a guy trying to survive, and he's definitely a jerk. He kills for a living,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
he's basically a guy getting his just desserts in the craziest fashion you can
Oh,
imagine.
definitely. Yeah, it's
It's
definitely
a lot
one
of
of
fun.
my favorites in the collection too.
Yeah,
As soon as I got, well, actually, when you first reached out to me and you said, "Hey, want to do a on my podcast, would do these stories?" Well, I think you asked me about gray matter, and you said you want to do another one, and I said sure. And when you sent me Battleground, I was like, yes, because I still remember that. And it was just, again, it's just a fun story.
yeah. All right, so I think that wraps it up for that story. But before we go, I have one more Stephen King question for you. Um, if there was one skill set that you could adapt into your own toolbox from Stephen King, what would it be?
Wow. One skill set. I think King is, well, I would just say he's really good at creating very believable characters.
Hmm.
Characters that seem very real. It's not that I can't, but I'm not nowhere near his level. So, but I mean, I think that's his biggest strength. But probably, he's really good at dialogue.
Mm,
I think that's,
absolutely.
sometimes dialogue is very. I know it sounds crazy. Sometimes dialogue is very hard to uh, to do and make it sound like it's real dialogue and not, oh, that looks like dialogue. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
There's a difference. And I marvel at when I'm reading some of my favorite authors, and the dialogue just, you don't even realize you're reading it. You're reading dialogue, obviously, but it doesn't sound like dialogue, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But I think he's really good at, kind of conveying that. I think his biggest strength, I know people bitch about his endings. I get it. He's got some clunkers, but I think King, just his characterization. I think if I have had to put my finger on the skill set, his characterization is really, really spot on and really, really good. He
Yeah, I
knows,
love that. I love that answer
he
because
knows people, and I
yeah,
think that's what I said before too about people that aren't really horror readers, but they like Stephen King, and why is that? Why are they attracted to it? I think it's his characterizations.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, there's one thing I would love to be able to adapt or absorb, I guess. I would love to be able to capture his sense of detail because he writes a lot of crazy detail, things that we notice
Hmm.
on a daily basis, but we tuck it away unconsciously. Like I forget where this is from, but I remember somebody using this as an example for the exact same thing. Somebody saw the reflection of the barn behind them in a water drop that was on like a hubcap of a tractor.
Yeah.
And that's just like detail that you would notice. You'd be like, huh, I can see the barn in that, right? But it would disappear. You wouldn't remember it ever again. But it's very human, you
That
know?
yeah, that's an amazing imagery. I just feel like, like, I guess the best way I could explain it is, um, like when I was reading Never Flinch. Like when you get to these characters, like he doesn't have to even really describe them. And I know these are characters that we've read about before, and I'm referring to some of the side characters that have been in a lot of the Holly books. It
Mhm.
To me, he doesn't even need to describe them. Like I can picture them in my mind, and I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody pictures them a little differently. But they just, the way that they talk, the way they interact, they to me they resonate as being very real, and I think that's genuinely a gift, you know.
Mhm.
And I think
Absolutely.
that's his strong. That's his strength.
Yeah. All right. So before we go, is there anything that you have coming out again? If you're repeating it, that's fine because this is a different episode. But anything coming out soon that you'd like to plug?
So I know I mentioned this earlier. My latest book came out last October. It's called Mr. Jack Requiem. It's the third book in the Mr. Jack Summerdale trilogy. It's available in ebook and trade paperback only on Barnes& and Noble's website. Or if you want a signed copy, I have signed copies available. You can reach out to me on my social media platforms. And then I also have the book I mentioned before, the follow up to The Ravening, which should be out later this year.
Awesome. And which platform do you haunt the most if people want to follow you?
The easiest, probably the one I'm more active on, is Facebook.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again so much for coming on and discussing not one, but two Stephen King short stories with me.
Oh, I had a great time, Jason. It was truly an honor, and thank you for inviting me.